Okay, well, that is 11:30. So hello everybody. Welcome to the very first roundtable of this year's BISA National Conference. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you especially to Mitsubishi Electric, who are sponsoring this roundtable and are the headline sponsors for the whole conference. So thank you, Mitsubishi.
Hello.
Great to have you here. And this is their choice of topic for the roundtable, which is the future of offices. And we may want to actually discuss, do they have a future? So because of all the things that are happening, and here we are all still scattered around the planet doing our conference virtually, but great to be together with you all, and welcome to, if you're overseas, welcome. It's 11:30 in the morning here in London. So welcome to the BISA National Conference. And our roundtable is called The Future of Offices. You may have heard earlier that the keynote presentation from George Clark, really fascinating, full of energy, full of ideas. He was talking about the massive global retrofit challenge. So I guess our topic kind of fits into that too. We're talking about the demise possibly of the traditional office space and whether, because the patterns of work are changing so dramatically, that offices will have to be repurposed. However, not everybody believes the traditional office space is something of the past anymore. I mean, there's just down the road from here, near Victoria, there's a £1 billion speculative office development that has just been given the go-ahead, and they're going to be starting on site next year. So there's still money to be made in building new offices, apparently. Yet, we're being told everybody's working from home. So interesting discussion point. And I noticed it coming in today, this morning, I came into BISA headquarters here near London Bridge, and there are thousands of people pouring in and off trains and charging over the bridge on their way to their offices. So people are coming back to city centre locations again, but the key word for all of this seems to be flexibility. It's not the same as it was. Patterns of working are changing dramatically. Many workers are now choosing to spend only part of their week in an office, and they're working from home 2-3 days a week. And that, I think we would probably all agree that's likely to be here to stay in some shape or form. In fact, what we're doing right now is an example of this. We've got hundreds of people online attending this conference, which they wouldn't have been able to do physically because of their locations or other reasons. So that's a big positive. And but in the past, we'd have all been crammed into the same space, which make people nervous about the air quality and so on, and what might be floating around in the air. So, again, a positive change in many ways. And presumably in the future, conferences like this will be hybrid events where we're trying to get together, because I think bringing people back together is so important, but lots of people will still be able to attend virtually. So that surely has an impact on our indoor spaces, and they will have to be more flexible. But if they're more flexible, then this has really important implications for building services. And this wonderful panel that we've got today for our roundtable, who I'll be introducing in a moment, will consider how our industry will have to adapt, what kind of services will be needed in the future, and what this means for energy efficiency, for sustainability, commissioning, air quality, and so on. It's a huge topic, very, very exciting topic. So anyway, I'd like to now introduce the panel, who will take you through the round table. So as I mentioned, Mitsubishi Electric are our sponsor for the roundtable and also our headline sponsor for the conference. And today, we're lucky to have Mark Grayston, Head of Product Strategy and Delivery. And Mark will be giving a presentation on their white paper that they've done on this topic. So that we'll be getting to that in a moment. So thank you, welcome, Mark. We've also got Wayne Buckley here. Wayne is from Temperature Control, and he's our contractor. He's our sharp end man. He's the voice at the tight end. He'll be talking to us later. And also a big welcome to Paul Mcdermott from BT. I think Paul is with us. I can't actually see him at the moment, but I'm sure he's there somewhere. This is the wonders of technology. Interesting to introduce a man from BT in that way. Apologies, Paul, for the cheap drive. BT Infrastructure and Property and Facilities Services, that's Paul. We have Graham Fox, Head of Technical at BISA. So Graham, thank you for joining us. Graham is just upstairs from me here. And then we have the the wonderful Nathan Wood, who's the chair of BISA's Health and Wellbeing in Buildings Group. And Nathan and I work together a lot on these kind of things, and I think Nathan will have a lot to say, particularly around the ventilation side and the air quality side. So that's introduction. Welcome to you all. I'd now like to invite Mark to start sharing his screen with us so we can see Mark's presentation. Mark will be taking us through Mitsubishi's white paper on the future of offices. And then once Mark's presented, we will then discuss it. And for all of you out there, there is a Q&A chat function that you should be able to access. So please send me questions. I'll be monitoring that. So if you see my eyes darting around wildly, it's because I'm trying to keep up with what's going on the screen and what's happening in the chat box. So do send in your contributions, any questions you'd like me to put to the panel. So thank you. So Mark, over to you, the future of offices.
Great, thank you, Ewen. Good morning, everyone. As Ewen said, my name is Mark Rayson. I'm head of product strategy and delivery here at Mitsubishi Electric. For any of the more keen-eyed will note that I'm a change of speaker from Mitsubishi Electric. Unfortunately, my colleague Phil has been stuck on the train. So what are we going to go through this morning? What we're going to talk about is around the future of offices. And we're going to talk around, in this short presentation and discussion beyond, what some of the challenges are, and offer up some potential solutions, and not just solutions that might be looking long-term into the future, but actually that can be implemented now and achievable now. As Ewen said, and as George mentioned this morning around this retrofit challenge, this has been quite a quick change that's been forced upon us as an industry. So we really need to look for practical measures that we can implement quickly, but also very effectively to address all of the needs of the future of an office. So this particular topic we looked at within Mitsubishi Electric and spoke to and did various different bits of research, and it's an interesting area that's obviously very much hot on the agenda. And when you kind of look at all the different bits of research and look around, there are many different inputs, there are many different opinions, there are many different thoughts on what the space might look like. You have different companies with different ideas on trying to get everyone back into the office. Some people I know have completely removed their office spaces. So there really is a real variance of inputs and opinions, and it's quite a difficult topic to grasp. So the thought on this white paper, and I believe there is a link being posted, so if anyone wants to look at it, they can do, is to try and cover as many of those viewpoints as possible on sort of looking at around HVAC and looking at buildings as a whole. So one of the key topics around future of offices is around health and well-being now and safety, and this is obviously linked to indoor air quality. The awareness of indoor air quality for everyone over this last 18, nearly 2 years now, has really shot up, and there are changes and there are needs to be changes in terms of people's perception, in terms of actually what needs to be addressed. And this is also now being pushed through from bodies such as the BISA to try and be implemented within legislation and other targets. So the sort of focus areas being around higher level of ventilation required within spaces to ensure that stale air is removed from the space. We've got a function, Part F of the building regulations, that's currently in consultation, looking for interim step improvements from next year and also in 2025, which is potentially going to address some of these areas. The need for filtration, so bringing in fresh air from outside. If it's not fresh, then it obviously needs to be filtered. And then also active monitoring and the ability to adjust systems, ability to adjust and understand what's going on. I think that, again, the BISA have done a lot of great work around raising the awareness of indoor air quality, and really if that can get higher on the agenda, then people will start demanding better quality air within that space. So if we look at higher levels of filtration first, when we look at this, what we're trying to do is add in additional ventilation into spaces to ensure that the stale air is removed, good quality air is introduced and obviously filtered. But doing that, and people will have noticed that obviously through the last month or so when it's been a lot colder, you just open the window, it's going to get very, very cold. So you want to try and recover as much energy as possible, and this is where focusing on heat recovery to minimize the impact of that cold air coming in or the hot air coming in the winter, and therefore linking to reducing running costs and removing that additional cooling load or additional heating load is really important. So when we're looking at achieving high levels of ventilation, ensuring that heat recovery is utilized is really, really important. When we then look through to, for example, Part F, I read in the consultation there was discussion around trying to be able to provision for a boost of an additional 50% airflow during winter months for potential pandemic proofing. And to achieve this can be quite difficult. Obviously, plant is designed with perhaps a little bit of additional capacity within it, but boosting airflow by that much is a significant increase. And again, when we kind of look at more modular-based solutions, this is maybe where it's a little bit easier to achieve. You've got a central plant, AHU, you might be lucky to get an extra 10 to 15% boost. But MVHR, you've got that modular benefits. And we've seen that same sort of modular benefits spanning across various bits of the MEP plant and also building. So these sort of MVHR systems tend to be designed on a lower fan speed because of mainly noise. And then you do get quite a lot of additional flexibility in terms of boost within those fans to get to potentially 50% boost if the noise level is acceptable and if the static pressure is available. If we then look through to filtration, that's another topic which is obviously really important. And I think, when we're looking at the sort of the hierarchy of improving indoor air quality, ventilation has got to be at the top, but you've got to ensure that the air is filtered so that you're getting good quality air into that space. And additional to that, you can also then look to treat the air within that space. So products such as this one, Plasma Quad Connect, which you can connect onto existing air conditioning systems, so retrofittable, and also on new systems. And this is focusing on being effective against additional pollutants, so viruses, bacteria, allergens, dust, mold, and the COVID virus as well. And importantly as well, PM2.5 as a very small particle that can get into lungs and the bloodstream can be very damaging. It's very important to address these different pollutants and see if we can reduce them where possible. And as well, active monitoring. So improving indoor air quality, you could just open the windows and that's going to have an element of benefit. But if you're not monitoring what's going on, you haven't got that visibility and you haven't got the ability to adjust a system to deliver what's needed. And a very common approach to this is to use CO2 monitoring. And obviously this is generally linked to occupancy, human occupancy within space, seeing as we produce CO2. And by using these sort of systems, obviously you can increase ventilation rates based on occupancy. And again, when we're talking about flexibility of a space, that's a really important thing to do. I think as well on this point is not only being able to control, but also bring the monitoring and the visibility. And there's obviously been areas around schools where I know that Nathan has commented on this around providing schools with CO2 monitors, but not actually being able to do anything with it, which is not particularly useful at all. But if you've got that ability to monitor and do something with it, and then also give the occupants the visibility of the quality of their air within the space, enabling them to either have action or demand improvements from the building owners and the FMs, that can only be an improvement. So kind of to focus on the second part of the document is around the sort of the change in that flexible working space. So like Ewen introduced at the start, the typical 9 to 5, 5 days a week is not that common anymore. I think some of the stats that we're talking about within that document, around 78% of people return to the office around 2 to 3 days a week. I know within our offices it kind of varies, and it varies depending on people's roles, on what sort of setups they have at home. So again, as Ewen said, flexibility is this sort of the key area. And when we're looking at offices in particular, what we kind of found from some of the research is people are looking for more meeting rooms. They're going into the office to have a discussion with somebody face to face, be collaborative, be creative, be innovative together. And therefore that's giving us more variance in occupancy swings, so going up to full occupancy down to potentially sort of 10% or less. And also the demands and the requirements for that space are potentially going to change more regularly as things adjust and change, and also maybe throughout the year as requirements and potentially future pandemics happen. So ways in which we can kind of look to this, and this is obviously it's a real challenge for a designer and anyone who's looking at the way in which they're looking at setting up their offices, is to, okay, how do I achieve that flexibility but maintain the comfort, maintain the quality of the air, maintain a reduction in my energy consumption, and therefore running costs, and also obviously importantly carbon associated to that. And simple systems that can look at occupancy, sort of using PIRs to control air conditioning, ventilating, and lighting, such as this controller here, are really, really important to help achieve this. So this particular solution here, when there's no occupancy, you can add dead bands into the air conditioning. You can maintain the room temperature at a comfortable level, but reduce the temperature setting and heating and increasing cooling to save energy. You can reduce ventilation mode, the ventilation air rate down to more of a trickle rate. You can turn the lighting off with it. So all of these elements that are ensuring that comfort is maintained, but energy is saved, and giving that flexibility of the space. And a personal preference of mine as well, and I know Phil, who wrote this presentation, really has a keen eye on this, around a solution to deliver that flexibility in terms of a heating and cooling system, is a solution called hybrid VRF, giving us the ability to utilize an air conditioning VRF system as a basis, with heat recovery. So we have the ability to deliver heating in some spaces, cooling in other spaces, which within the UK market is around 75 to 80% of the demand in our country. And that's because of that flexibility, it's because of that comfort, it's also because of the additional energy saving benefits where you're able to transfer energy between spaces. And the difference between the hybrid variant is that the refrigerant is between the outdoor unit and the hybrid branch controller box, and then we're taking water from the box until the indoor units. And what that gives us is flexibility in being able to move those indoor units as the space changes. It's a simple case of isolating the unit at the BC, draining the water down, and moving the indoor units around, rather than having to remove all the refrigerant from the system. Making it more flexible there. And also when we're thinking about office spaces and improvements to that space, because we're using water, we're getting less drying of the air with higher SHF, and we're getting very comfortable and stable temperatures. We've got a good volume of water, the air off in heating is lower, and air off in cooling is higher. And the ability to modify, there's also a benefit here. We're talking about small diameter plastic pipe between the main box and the indoor units. As I say, we don't need to break into that refrigerant circuit, and because it's a modular design, it allows phased modification and phased maintenance and adjustment of the building space depending on what the occupier is looking for. So that was a very brief overview of the Future of Offices white paper and some of the sort of findings and elements that we speak about within that. I think I'm handing back over to you now to go to Q&A.
Thank you, Mark. That's great. Thank you very much. That's given us a really good good overview, a good introduction. I think we can actually produce quite a broad discussion based on some of those technical aspects, and then we can sort of stretch that out to the wider implications. So what I would like to do is I'll just give the guys just a quick warning. I thought I'd go to each of you first and just say how is what Mark's been talking about coming through into your day-to-day working. So just while you're thinking about that, I just wanted to mention that something Mark touched on was the work that Mitsubishi and Visa have been doing together. And we have produced so far 2 pieces of guidance. One was around defining indoor air quality. The second one was about what you should measure and monitor. And we're now working on a third piece, which is going to be about the solutions. Now, a lot of that was what Mark was getting into. How do we sort of mitigate the issue? So measure, monitor, and mitigate, and that's kind of our motto with the Visa Health and Wellbeing and Buildings Group that Nathan chairs, and we're really enjoying our collaboration with Mitsubishi on that. So watch out for our third stage of guidance. We're looking for a big launch in the new year on that. So just coming to each of you in turn, I'll probably catch you out because I'll just go to you as you appear on my screen. So I just wanted to say, so Mark's given us a very good detailed overview of some of the implications of the future office. So Wayne, is this something you're coming across in your day-to-day working?
Yeah, morning everyone. Yeah, still morning, so that's okay. The main thing we're finding, because we're more sort of air conditioning contractor, but the impact of ventilation that end users, clients are now introducing, I think there's quite a change to take away the heat recovery, to bring fresh air into buildings, which I think you mentioned before, that Mark, in the summer months it wasn't as much of an impact, but now we're getting colder. We're now seeing sort of cold temperatures. Systems already installed aren't man enough to heat the air, and I think there's got to be a little bit more control. Appreciate everyone was taking health and safety as the key point to address first, but now we're moving forward, getting out of the pandemic. I think is a little bit more thought how everything interacts. I know Nathan's here on this ventilation, and I think the key thing, as Mark said as well, is getting the ventilation, getting clean air into the building. But then we also need to sort of look at how we heat, cool, and maintain a comfortable environment.
All right, thanks, Wayne. Now, you talked about getting air into the building. I'm going to go to Nathan now, because Nathan has a bit of a bugbear about some of the language that's flying around at the moment, because people keep talking about fresh air. And his point is, how do you know the air is fresh? So Nathan, I know the answer to the question. How is this impacting your everyday working? It's every minute of every waking minute of every working day for you, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Hi everyone. It's in terms of our office though. We need people in our office. We can't work on a hybrid system. We've had to do it, and it doesn't work. The way that our service team bounce off each other in that sort of open plan environment. So a lot of places are doing a hybrid system working from home, but for us as a business, our service team works best together. Yes, we fell foul of the COVID screens, the COVID theatre screens, whatever you want to refer to them as. But indeed, we were only able to reactivate our office fully because we had already taken into place measures such as heat recovery, ventilation, air quality monitoring, good controls with the air conditioning as well. So we were quite spoiled and able to do that purely because of the journey that we were already on. I think a lot of businesses now are understanding that they've been caught on the hop, that indoor air quality has been overlooked because it can be. It's intangible most of the time. But with COVID making indoor air pollution visible, I think there's a whole new angle to it now. It's the well-being side. Previous webinars on sick building syndrome, that almost seems like a word of the past, but that's what we used to talk about before. So definitely with all of these guides coming from Mitsubishi's doing some great work, and the white paper is really, really good. I'd recommend downloading it. It's a good read. With all of this building, it's only going to end up going to a better place for everybody and their workplaces.
Thanks, Nathan. That's great. I know how close to your heart this topic is. Paul, welcome. Nice to have you with us. Nice to have BT on the call. Great to have a view from a major infrastructure business. How big an issue is the future of offices for BT?
Do you know, it's not a big issue for us really, because we've already engaged in a huge program a couple of years ago to reinvest in our offices, and thankfully today I'm based in our London office, which we've just invested in, as 325,000 square foot building based over 22 floors. It will have approximately 4,500 people in the building, not all at once obviously at the moment, but our colleagues are expressing a real strong interest to get back into the workplace. Being at home has done what we needed to do, but as it stands right now, our colleagues are desperate for that social interaction with colleagues, coming into a space which, you know, I say thankfully this building that we've just built, we got it right at the right time for COVID. So we've been able to rethink our plans and say, what do we want out of a building now? So it's not linear desks, rows everywhere. We've got tons and tons of communal space, meeting space, collaborative space. And that's something that our staff are crying out for. So whether they do come back to the office 2, 3, 4 or 5 days a week, they're actually really keen and excited to get back into these buildings, because it allows them to do the bits that they've not been able to do for nearly the last 2 years, working in a very insular space. So, you know, for us, I think it's a really exciting time now. This is one of the many buildings that we'll be working on at the moment. Another large building going up in Bristol, another large one going up in Manchester. So actually, you know, on an early point you mentioned, Ewen, the market for us is still very strong for officers, and we've got no inclination whatsoever to draw that down and encourage people to work from home, because we know that our staff generally really want to be back working alongside the colleagues.
It's good to hear that, Paul. I mean, for basically a technology company, that your people still value that physical interaction. They want to be together, and so it's good to hear. That's a positive message, I would say, from the building services side. I mean, Graham, I mean, what are you hearing from members, that the BISA members?
Thanks, Ewan. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, it's much like what the guys are all saying. It's this the change of use of offices and the change of attitudes of people wanting to come into work, and I've certainly been a big advocate for getting back into the office. I actually do work from home most of the time anyway, so I was quite lucky when it all kicked off, because I was already set up at home with a proper home office in my house. But not everyone has that, of course, and a lot of our colleagues, a lot of my colleagues I should say, really struggled with the working from home thing, because they didn't have a dedicated space at home like I do. They maybe had school kids at home because obviously the schools were closed, so they were having to balance childcare with their daily work. The internet connections maybe aren't as strong, particularly some of our colleagues that work up in the Cumbria office, as you know, and some of them actually live quite rurally, and the internet connection is not something that's actually particularly good for some of them. So it was a real struggle for a lot of people, and a lot of our members who obviously look after offices for their clients and have real concerns about how they can make the offices safe to get back into. So yeah, it's been a big problem. And it was interesting actually with Mark's presentation. I'm not sure if anybody could see my screen. I could see all of our screens at the bottom. I'm not sure if that was live or not. But just when Mark put up the screen about using PIRs to control the systems in the office, the lights in this room closed off right behind me. So it wasn't meant. It wasn't planned, I can assure you.
Plunged into darkness.
Plunged into darkness. Luckily, there's a little light on the actual camera, so you can still see me.
All right, thanks, Graham. No, and it is interesting. Obviously, I do a lot of work with BISA, and it's interesting to hear both sides, actually, the staff side and the member side, and I find this is becoming such an important area for members too. And the issue being, and I'd like to throw this out generally, see how you pick this up. If employers are now accepting, I mean, I think Mark's stat was 78% of workers will be coming back into the office 2 or 3 days a week, which implies a very, very high percentage are spending most of their working week, or a good chunk of their working week, at home. Now, if people are working at home, do employers therefore have a responsibility for making sure they're working in good conditions? And I think primarily, we hear all these stories of people perched on the end of their bed with a laptop on their knee, or in a little, cramped bedroom, or in shared accommodation. I mean, there's surely a major implication here about how we look after people's health and well-being at home, but make sure that they're safe as well and working in a way that's productive too. So is that a role for our industry, do you think? Do you think we're going to be seeing more people taking more responsibility for the indoor air quality, for example, in people's homes because they're working from home? Thoughts, guys?
It was interesting when you mentioned about employers having responsibility there. I could see Wayne and Nathan, both as employers, grimacing a little bit when you said that. It does beg the question. I mean, if you're going to go down that route of employers having some kind of duty of care on their employees when they're not working in the office, I mean, you obviously do when they're working remotely, for example. But working from home, you don't have any control over people's homes. It's a very big can of worms, I think.
I'll jump in. You're right. I mean, we've got the Health and Safety at Work Act. Do we need the Health and Safety at Home Act? It's where do we go? And then the cost implications. Suddenly people are having to heat their home all day, and live within that space. Desk assessments happen at work, ergonomics, and as we said, some people are sat on a bed, shared accommodation. But it does go further than that, because if they can't afford to heat their home, should we be putting forward grants or ways in which we can support that? And then there's the mental health side of it. As a lot of us have said, a lot of people need this human interaction. I thrive in a busy office when the people are here and we're able to collaborate and bounce off each other. So I think, yes, we've got laptops, we've got internet, and the majority of people who are able to do that can. But I think the initial bubble will burst as time goes on. I think a lot of people that were at home with their kids and families, and the normal day-to-day issues that don't come into your working life are suddenly mixed in and amongst it all. Some people would desperately get back to work, and I think as time goes on, we will see a gradual decrease in the amount of people that are working from home. But you're right, there is this issue at the moment of, if something was to happen, who's responsible or culpable, and the balance.
Nathan, I'll come in there. So, I'm quite lucky. I work for a huge business. But what I will say is, with over 100,000 people, any solution didn't fit all of us. And I've got to say, we were treated fantastically throughout the pandemic. Day one, we were all told, go home, let's figure it out. Let's get everybody home, let's get safe, and then we'll think about it moving forward. As a key infrastructure employer and critical to the UK, we were given dispensation to say certain people needed to go back into the workplace. So all of that, people perched on the end of beds and sitting at dining tables, that was a factor for some people, and it wasn't possible. So we opened a large number of buildings in a very, very safe way that said, we will make you the facilities available for you to come in and do the work that you need to do, because without it, nobody would be working from home, because obviously the network still needed to be in place. So, but from a well-being point of view, from an ergonomics point of view, all of that, I've got to say that we were treated very well. The business stepped up and said, what do you need to be able to do your job safely, efficiently, and comfortably at home as well? So, not every business was able to do that, granted, but we needed to be able to operate right throughout. And from a well-being point of view, the business made sure that we had what we needed. Simple things like readjusting all of our shift patterns. If we needed to deal with the kids in the day because we were homeschooling, that was fine. That was, let's do that, and we'll do the work later on. So, there was many times over the last 12 months where our working day probably didn't start till 3 or 4 o'clock, and we work until 8, 9 o'clock. But it gave us that freedom to relax and look after our children in the day, do the homeschooling. So it was a challenging time, but at the same time, everybody just rolled the sleeves up and got stuck in. Going back to your point on air quality, heating, all of those factors, they're tough on a lot of people. And I think there's not, there's certain things that employers can do to help people, and certain things that the government have offered as well. There was grants for people, you were able to claim a tax relief from working from home, which was not an awful lot of money, but, to a lot of people, it probably did help. But the reality was, everybody just had to get stuck in and do what we needed to do in a very, very tough circumstance. And I think, as a business, we came through that really well. And even still now, even though the restrictions have been lifted to a certain extent, when you come into our workplaces, there's still what we would class as a COVID secure location. There's signage up. We encourage safe distance working. We've got plenty of hand sanitization stations, etc. So it's going in the right direction. It's taken the employees' well-being first and foremost.
I think it'll be interesting. Actually with the rising energy bills to see, particularly coming into winter and people working from home with the rising energy costs, if that will actually be a driving factor to get people back into the office a bit more often. I think it's probably going to be quite a big factor for a lot of low to middle income earners, certainly.
Yeah, a lot of people used to pop into the office just to warm up, didn't they? In winter, or in the summer, pop in where it's air conditioned. Which brings me nicely to you, Mark. I mean, from a manufacturer's perspective, are there technical implications here in terms of hybrid offices? Are more people getting these kind of more sort of permanent workspaces at home, and does that have implications for a company like Mitsubishi?
Yeah, so I suppose from a supply point of view, we've definitely seen a change in the demands of the type of solutions that people are looking for, and the applications that they're looking for within them. So, we're looking at within the office space the sort of things I've spoken about, but in terms of like a domestic environment, we're seeing real upticks in domestic ventilation and domestic air conditioning. People over the summer especially were sat in their office spaces. Like here, we've got a big window here that the sun comes around at one point in time and it gets very hot. So, that sort of change and that demand from homeowners is there. But there's I suppose still some to be done around being able to supply as a manufacturer and also as a supply chain reasonably costed solutions to help overcome those things, whether it be heat pumps, whether it be air conditioning, whether it be ventilation. In a commercial environment, those sort of things are understood and the costs are there and known. But in domestic environments, it's something very different. I think we've picked that up as a trying to learn from how maybe other bits within the country, within the world. Sorry, Southern Europe. How do they do it and how do they achieve it and what are they looking at? So I think from a global manufacturing point of view, we're trying to look at how solutions are adapting on a domestic level, but also on a commercial level.
And actually, what you're talking about was what George Clark was talking about earlier. And I think there is a relationship between Mitsubishi and George, because it's almost adding another layer of complexity. He's talking about the retrofit, very much the retrofit challenge for homes, and how important that is going to be. I mean, it's almost like a cornerstone of the climate change debate. What we're going to do about housing and how you do it in an affordable way. And this is such a major challenge. If you're talking about putting new technology into homes, how you do that both in a green way and also how you make it affordable. I mean, Wayne, I don't know from Temperature's point of view, how are you doing more work for people who are looking to do this remote working?
Not ourselves, we're sort of more commercial, but we have seen definitely uprise in requirements for home air conditioning, or inquiries coming through. It's definitely a market that's there. I think home offices is becoming quite, those who can afford it are going down that route as well. And fire manufacturers are being told that we're not looking at this because the small split systems sales are going through the roof, I believe. So it's I think, like I say, I think what we've got to look at is this sort of, it's been quite a sudden change. We've had to adapt. As Paul said, that we've all sort of rolled our sleeves up and got stuck in. But now I think it's time to sort of sit back and look at what we really need to do, because as we start to put new systems in, we don't want to go back to the old bits. And I'm sure Nathan will back me up here, where ventilation sort of is a second thing to sometimes cooling and heating. It should be a whole package in how we look at it. And I think one thing we've all learned about social interaction, being outside and stuff, that sort of good quality air in a space is what's going to sort of help us carry on into the future and have a healthy working environment. And I think that's really where we, rather than just react, start being proactive now in our approach through consultancy, through manufacturers, what they can offer, and through contractors as well, and giving the right advice.
Wayne, it's a very good point, that. And one thing that I've noticed recently is, so the likes of the BCO and BREEAM, they've started to increase the ventilation rates. So we're looking in our buildings now of anything between 12 and 14 litres per second per person, whereas SIBSI is still 8 to 10.
Yeah.
How long before we start to see an increase now on those basic requirements? And then the problem that people will face in the office is, how can you retrofit that requirement into an existing building? Because you've got ductwork, you've got steels already in place, you've got ceilings fitted. How feasible will it be to, for somebody to make a quick change that says, we want you to flood the building with even more fresh air? It's a very simple thing to say, an extremely difficult thing to do. So you're right, it all needs to be considered now as a package. When people are looking at the heating and cooling within a building now is, well, how are we actually going to tie in the whole air quality piece and ventilation? And I think that's going to be a real difficult challenge for a lot of employers, because they're building infrastructure, the way it's set up, the way it's built, the way it's fitted out is going to make that really, really difficult. So that's going to be one to watch, I think, over the next 6 to 12 months to see how that one plays out.
Yeah.
I think George Clark was really talking about the expensive retrofit more from the domestic point of view, but I mean, your point there, Paul, is absolutely spot on. I think the big issue that we've got with commercial buildings is that, for example, increasing that ventilation rate, the ductwork system's already in. If you actually put a bigger fan effectively in to put more air through that same duct, you're going to have all kinds of problems with noise,
vibration, balancing,
noise, exactly, and that's why it's such a big issue for commercial buildings. There is, of course, the fact that if we are having fewer people going into the office, so the occupancy levels are lower, then you are de facto increasing that supply rate per person. So that might be a way that building managers can actually get around this issue of having that kind of 12 to 14 instead of 8 to 10 litres per second per person. If you just restrict the number of people in the building to 2/3 of what it was previously, then you're actually doing that in effect. And it's not very scientific, maybe. And it's difficult to control if people are looking at this kind of hybrid working where everyone's in Tuesday to Thursday and you can work from home Monday to Friday, because then everything's great in the office Monday and Friday and just not good enough on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So it's a big problem, and I'm glad I don't look after a building.
To add to that as well, just because you can record the litres per second coming through a grill doesn't mean it's getting into the space adequately. Doesn't mean that it's diluting properly. So there's another complete new angle in terms of like what Professor Kathy Noakes pitched with the previous BESA webinars during lockdown, is the way in which air moves within a space, and how these screens that, as I said, we used, were actually reducing the airflow within our office space. And by removing some of them, not all of them, depending on the way that the desks were laid out, aided our ventilation. I mean, it can be extremely difficult to adequately ventilate a building, be that somebody's home or an office space, but it can be extremely simple just by having a professional body come in, knows what they're doing, look at the space, engineer a solution, present it formally, and just go through the normal processes that a lot of people do. Unfortunately, so many businesses have had COVID have had a negative effect on them, that they're moving across into this ventilation sector now, and suddenly everybody's an IAQ expert. So I think it's a case of making sure that whoever does come through that door does carry some pretty hefty accreditations behind them, membership, etc., and have a really good understanding of air conditioning flow rates, ventilation flow rates, AHU capacities. You can't just whack a Hepa filter into an AHU without taking in seriously the calculations of flow rates and etc. But it can be. I'm hearing a lot that it's extremely difficult, but for us in the sector that have been in it for a long time, it can be pretty straightforward if you speak to the right people.
It's a good point, that, Nathan. We've seen in the media a general increase in people mentioning the use of Hepa filters, and it scaremongers people then, because nobody really understands the implications of sticking a Hepa filter into a central AHU system and thinking, well done, you've just gone from 8 to 10 to 2 to 3 litres per second because the air can't get through the filter now. So you know, the thing for me is that when people are delivering messages, there's got to be some thought around it and a bit of common sense that says, if the system's designed and you can use it, and brilliant, but don't just throw a statement out there where everybody then thinks, why aren't we using Hepa filters? Well, actually it doesn't suit the business. And then another point on that. So, you know, thankfully the buildings that we're building now, like I said, we got in at the right time. So we've put all exposed surfaces in the ceilings now. And that now gives us the flexibility to be able to adapt as we need to as time moves forward. The challenge now goes back to, unfortunately, the manufacturers like Mitsubishi that says, your kit has now not just got to be functional, it's got to be aesthetically pleasing as well, because it's going to be on show for everybody to see. And once you get that coordination right and you get them services set out, from then a building user, a building maintainer, and a building alterer, your life becomes so much easier because it's there and it's visible. So I think on another point on future of offices, I think exposed services will become extremely more important and well used going forward, because it will give people that flexibility to make changes without the massive disturbance of taking ceilings down, etc.
It's a good point, Paul. And actually exposing the services might be one way of reassuring people who are a bit nervous about coming back to an office that things are being done to make that space safe by addressing the air quality and the ventilation. I mean, interesting, Nathan, you mentioned Kath Noakes. She's our keynote speaker tomorrow morning. She's coming back again. We've had great value out of Kath at Visa. She's become a sort of ventilation guru, and looking forward to hearing what she's got to say tomorrow morning. But she very much talked about this problem of people just throwing air into the space and thinking that was solving the problem, and really wants people to focus on how you control airflow. And again, so a really important point for future of offices, if you've changed the layout of your office, and as Graham was talking about the occupancy levels, then you've got to think more carefully about ventilation. And I just wondered if people start to think this way and think more and pay more attention to the ventilation, does that mean we'll start to move towards a more sustainable model, and perhaps the flexible offices we're talking about might be more sustainable, more carbon efficient, so more energy efficient, reduce carbon emissions. So something we were talking earlier about trying to send a signal to the people in Glasgow right now about some of the things that our industry can do. And could that be something we could say to the COP26 conference? Our industry is addressing the future of offices in a way that will make them more sustainable.
If I can just add, I think, like you say, taking this step now where we're coming out of the pandemic is looking at design better, making sure things are applied correctly. But as you say, controls as well. If you've got a flexible workforce, if you've got a strong control strategy, that can help reduce energy use and control the systems far better than what we find now, where a lot of it, as we all know, is price driven. What's the cheapest to get into a building? I think, you know, as Paul's mentioned, you know, like BT taking the lead with the right environment will help, you know, the systems to be done. It has to start sometimes at the top and be led by, you know, good companies like BT, which hopefully then influences the industry going forward.
And we mentioned about the Hepa filters affecting the actual ventilation rates, but we didn't mention about the energy penalty with putting the Hepa filtration on, because obviously you have that additional power that's needed to drive the air through that the filter. And as you say, Ewan, this week in particular with COP26 going on, the whole net zero focus that everyone is now starting to embrace, and it's certainly been talked about in a more favourable light than it was a couple of years ago. And things like that are you know, incredibly important. And that's where, you know, Mark was talking in his presentation about the MVHR systems, for example, and I've always been a big advocate of them. And when I was a contractor, I used to install quite a lot of Mark's wasn't units, to be fair. Because they were incredibly efficient at actually providing that ventilation into properties without losing the heat. It's incredibly important.
Yeah, I think just to add to that as well, Ewan, it's an interesting piece, this sort of balance between making sustainability, reducing energy and carbon, and making things still effective at what they're trying to do. And we're kind of seeing that in product development. And there's a session I'm doing tomorrow on embodied carbon, and you're looking at how much carbon is associated to a product in its sort of manufacturing through its life cycle. And you can make differences that reduce its embodied carbon but increase its operational carbon. And I suppose it's the same when we're looking here, as you say, you're looking to improve the indoor air quality, but you're affecting the energy consumption. And it's about trying to, I suppose, predict and understand what that might look like in the future, and working with the sort of the various bodies to put the legislation in place to try and help people model it, but then making sure we're measuring it so that when it's actually operating in its life and in performance, that you can actually see that sort of how effective those measures have been. So it's not just a theory; it's kind of that reality piece that we need to link together as well.
I think as well the technology can work in harmony with energy efficiency and reduce carbon. It is possible. These remote dashboards, IoT sensors, it doesn't have to be complicated, and you don't need a physical interaction. There's a lot of artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms that can be applied to a building, even a small office like ours. We're looking at adapting the systems that we've got onto a centralized dashboard. If somebody as an SME can do it, BT can do it, why can't everybody do it? It doesn't cost the earth. There's a lot of disruptors coming into the industry, putting some positive spin on what's always been the standard. Or you need a BMS system, you need a head end, you need an engineer to come to site. Those days are going. They are still needed, but I think the controls houses have been sort of caught out a little bit with the amount of people coming into the sector, doing some positive disruption. And I do like the word, and I do like the way it goes about. So yeah, we need to embrace these new technologies coming through and how they can be pretty simply for us in the industry retrofitted onto existing systems, taking into account energy consumption, what you're putting in. But overall, the overarching thing is, if you're investing in something, what's the return on investment? It comes up time and time again. Is it energy? Is it productivity? Is it health and well-being? Or is it all of these points? And I think with some joined up thinking and the right people involved, it is achievable.
So are you, saying this, John Kerry, ahead of COP26, was saying the solution to the climate crisis is new technologies that are coming down the line. But what I'm sort of getting from this discussion is we're actually talking about making better use of what we've already got, which is the one way to do it affordably. Would you agree that's a better summary and simplifying? And Nathan, you were talking about making things simpler. So people are more likely to be able to control their indoor environment if they are able to control it simply.
Yeah. You come into a building, you scan into your building. We don't, but Graham does. I would imagine at BISA and BT certainly does. You could just have it that the system recognises that someone's come into the building and the ventilation system speeds up proportionally. When they leave, it drops down again. Something as simple as that. Yeah. Simple integration of two existing systems doesn't cost the earth. It's doable, and we can do it now. We can do it.
The technology definitely already exists, and you're spot on. We're just not using it properly. We have an all singing, all dancing air conditioning heat pump system in the offices here, but they're controlled by an external BMS instead of letting the VRV actually do its thing and actually control itself. Because if you just use a BMS system like that, you can have it, as Nathan says, to indicate someone's in the building. You need to bring the system on, but let the manufacturer's technology actually determine how it runs. It's so much more energy efficient in the long run, rather than having some generic BMS system that's trying to control set points, and it just can't do it.
Yeah. Was that part of your thinking at BT, Paul, when you're setting up the office for the future?
Yes.
That you needed to make good use of the technologies we already have, because you can't depend on what's coming down the line, and also just make it easy for people to control their own environment.
No, so at the moment we've got a specific IoT committee. There's a number of people across all different sectors of the business now coming together and looking at it and saying, how do we make this work for us? It's not just about sensors. It's about the whole piece and bringing it together. Things like Nathan, your point's very valid. So what we're looking at now is we're looking at not just sensors, but actually cameras that will act as sensors, cameras that will count the people within the room, look at occupancy, tell us which parts of the building are being used more than other parts of the building. So then we divert the number, why do we need so much fresh air going into an empty space? Divert that fresh air and push it to where the people are being. analyze the use of the building, look at desk-based occupancy to see where it is. We bring lights on when people are there. We bring the cooling and heating on when people are there. We turn it off when they're not. So all of this is something, it's not mature yet, because there's a lot of things to bring in, but you're right, that technology is there. And I think it's been there for quite some time. It's just taken a lot of people a long time to actually start looking at it and saying, well, how do we apply this? Because there's technology that's been out there and it's been used in a totally different way for many, many years. But now people are looking at different ways of using that technology and saying, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? So yeah, it's a big thing for us right now, and there's plenty of trials going on, and it is quite exciting. Unfortunately, it's not something I'm directly involved in. It's a beast in itself, and there's a big team working on it. But maybe in 12 months' time, if we do something similar, I'll share those findings with you. It's something that I'm really keen to see how it affects how we use the building, how we operate the building, and how we occupy it.
But whatever we do, we need to be able to do it at scale. Now, I don't take this the wrong way. I mean, BT is a big organization with a lot of resources, and whatever you're doing, you're able to throw a budget at it. I'm sure you're not throwing unlimited amounts of money at it, but you have a certain amount. But whatever we come up with, and this is something George Clark was saying earlier, whatever we do, we need to be able to make this affordable to everybody. I mean, yes, as you were saying earlier, Graham, I think he was focusing primarily on homes, but I mean, the same principle applies across offices. And whatever we do, we need to be able to do at scale, which means it has to be affordable. And I think that's a big hurdle for our sector, because at the end of the day, everybody's interested in selling a new solution, aren't we?
Well, Ewan, I think this is where maybe people are looking at the wrong way around. These solutions have been readily available for the last 5-6 years, actually, to end users and the home. Look at your Hive systems, look at your Google Home, your Apple Home. All of these systems were actually aimed at the home before they were ever designed for the workplace. So the workplace is the last one coming to the table. So I don't think scalability is an issue. I think it's been there for quite some time. You've got your BMS systems doing it at the large end. You've got your Hive and your Google and your Apple systems down at the lower end. You're now getting a hybrid of people trying to bring all those together now, using APIs, using intermediary systems, and saying, how do we connect the dots on all of these systems and bring them together? And that's where this will evolve. And like you say, your central BMS systems may be replaced by 12 or 13 other little systems in a small environment that actually talk to each other on a regular basis, and then start to do much, much wider things. So your resilience actually becomes better, because you're not reliant on a single system that can fall over them.
Yeah. So we need to
end of the scale. Sorry, go on, Ewan.
No, all I was going to say was we need to explain that to people better. The technology's there, just use it.
Exactly that. At the other end of the scale, with social housing, they have direct extract systems, separate supply fans, and heating on full blast. And we get asked to go in and, can you change that like for like? Well, no, why don't you look at putting the heat recovery system in and having it controlled with your heating? Because the communal heating is on 24/7. This place is boiling. Can we go outside and have a chat? See, the amount of wasted heat and energy that's going on throughout all of the councils and boroughs, majority of them, there's some good thinking and joined up thinking going on in some, but the trouble is, it's the education across the board. There's a lot of people that just change like for like. Yeah, we don't want to upgrade it, we want like for like. So it's about people in our sector educating our clients and our customer base about what is possible and what they should look to start and engage with now.
Well, we've got 2 minutes to go, and it sounds like we could end on an optimistic note. We've been trying to do that. George Clark was trying to be optimistic about the future. Is that the optimistic note we can end this discussion on? Is that with the solutions are there, what we need to do a better job of is just getting the message out there. And perhaps because of everything that happened with the pandemic, so people are more focusing on ventilation, they've got a bit of an understanding. I think just seeing people wearing face coverings means they're thinking about what's happening around them in their spaces. Is this an opportunity we now have to say to people, this technology exists, please use it, it's going to secure your future? And so that's an optimistic note. Wayne, you're nodding.
Yeah, no, just like I say, I do think it's the right time to take this opportunity to start getting things going back, doing it right again, engineering the right solution, rather than just looking at a price-driven solution. Sorry to say that, but it's time that we, the technology's been there for years, and we've got a great opportunity, as building service engineers, to make the change, and hopefully we can start them discussions, look at the solutions, and come away from the pandemic in a lot better place.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, that's us out of time. Thank you. Fascinating discussion. I scribbled down a few notes here of things I'm going to be optimistic about going forward. Just to say, for people who are on the session, if you want to download Mitsubishi's white paper on the future of offices, which Mark was presenting about, the link is in our Q&A feed. So there's a link there. You can just click on that and download it. And so that only leaves me to say thank you very much to Mark and to Mitsubishi for making this session possible, and for doing all that work and producing the white paper, which gave us a great basis for discussion. And thank you all, Mark, Wayne, Nathan, Graham, and Paul, for your insights. I think that was such a nice broad panel. We got a really good overview of the topic. So thank you very much. Thanks to everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference. There is actually a technical session or a discussion session tomorrow on the future of offices. So please feel free to come along to that. We've got some consulting engineers who may have different ideas. So please join us for that. Actually, I think I'm chairing that one as well. So I'll just repeat everything that you guys said. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.